Hello, dear friends. Hello, dear friends, near and far. Welcome to this beautiful program. Thank you for joining us today. The Spiritist Talk series, which is promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation, and it takes place every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I am very happy to host this talk today by Anna Moreno, who will be talking to us about autoimmune conditions and Spiritism. Hello, dear Anna. Welcome to this program.
Hi,
And,
Sunshine. Thank you so much.
and before we begin, let us introduce Anna. She's the co founder and president of the Chico Xavier Learning Center in Portland, Oregon. After a life threatening autoimmune diagnosis in 2013, Anna changed her career path in Silicon Valley and started learning about ways to control her autoimmune condition. Today, she is in remission. Beautiful. We welcome you warmly, Anna. Thanks for
Thank you
being
so
here.
much. So, welcome everyone. As Sunshine introduced me, my name is Anna Moreno, and I currently live in Portland, Oregon. About 13 years ago, I was diagnosed with lupus, and that really changed my mind and made me rethink about the ways that I was living and also what I could do to live a better life. When I was talking to some friends in terms of, the topic of this uh, lecture, one of them said, "Why don't you talk about autoimmune?" And I thought that was a very interesting topic. Why? Because there are so many of us that are facing different challenges with our health, and many times we feel alone. And that's a good way to show that spiritism, medicine are working together to basically come up with an answer for all of us. But before we move forward, I I want you to put here a couple of disclaimers. First of all, I'm not a medical physician, so while I made a huge research in terms of the content from a medical perspective and also spiritual perspective, the side of spiritism. Do not take everything that I'm saying and leave behind all the guidance from your doctors. All the spiritual therapy and support does not dismiss the medical treatments that we go through. Also, if you have any questions about autoimmune conditions, please refer to your doctor because they are the right people to basically tell you about the best options for you. So as we move forward, I wanted to think together with you guys about what is health and what is illness. And health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And this is a big step because many times we would be looking at health just as the physical aspect. So I don't have a headache or my body doesn't hurt, when it goes way beyond, because our health is a combination of various factors, as I listed over there: psychological, biological, environmental, and also our lifestyle and spiritual. So for many years, we've seen more and more attention in terms of the influence of the mind in the body and vice versa. In Yoga Sutras, wrote by Patanjali about 5,000 years ago, he explains that all sufferings come from storms or impulses from our mind. We can achieve this mind and body health and this well-being that we were talking about when we learn to still the mind. And then it comes André Luiz, about 70 years ago. And I'm going to share with you some of my research from his books, where he opened a huge door to show us that our thoughts and our emotions influence our health, and that the spiritual realm is in constant contact with you. And then we go back a couple of decades and we see more and more science confirming that the mind controls all the systems of the body. And this was a breakthrough. Why? Because before they thought that our brains and the mind, the brain meaning the instrument, and the mind is the individual thinker per se, it's our spirit, as we know. They were independent from the other parts of the body. So would not be involved, and we're going to see that with the endocrine system and the other systems as well. And that's not true. So my purpose today is to share with you all my findings from this research and see how we can live in a better way, understanding the mechanics of the disease, suffering, and how we should be living a life, or how we can live a life despite of any diagnosis that we may have. So as we move forward, autoimmune disease, unfortunately, is on the rise. So there was a 2020 study basically showing that there is an increase for about like 3 to 12% annually across the globe. And doctors are still struggling to understand the root causes and how to stop this trend. And I don't know if many of you know that, but the autoimmune diseases, in many cases, have unknown causes. So another aspect of it that I think kind of brings another fold is with COVID, some of the long-term effects of COVID is really starting some autoimmune diseases, such as some type of thyroid deregulation. So this is coming more and more into our attention. But before we move forward to explaining in more details what the findings are and everything else, I wanted to talk about a little bit about what is an autoimmune disease. So autoimmune means that our immunity is against ourselves. So according to Medline, our immune system protects us from diseases and infections, and everybody knows that. And what they do is basically attacking germs, such as viruses and bacteria. So our immune system can tell that the germs are not part of our body. They're the bad guys and they destroy them. But when someone has an autoimmune disease, the immune system attacks the health of cells, of our organs, tissues, systems by mistake. So as we can see some of the examples over there, and as we just said, there are more than 80 types of autoimmune diseases that have been recognized by medicine as of today. It can be our liver, it can be our thyroid, it can be our brains. So we need to be very careful about our health on that standpoint. But before we move, I want to bring this, because if you have faced lately a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease, you're not alone. And from the depth of my heart, I'm very sorry that you face that news, because it's a very hard conversation, and in finding that our life will be impacted can really many times throw us out of place. But while autoimmune diseases in their majority cannot be cured, they can be controlled, and that's a big hope. It feels like that the doctors all over the world are paying more and more attention about all these mysterious diseases, trying to understand the causes, the triggers, and how to better treat them. And above all, as we are here about this Spiritist talk, Spiritism gives us another view of this problem. And it really fills my heart with hope that we can have quality of life despite of that. So autoimmune disease does not define you. Many of us think that the diagnosis is basically a sign and we should stop living. It's like a life sentence. And I can tell you it's not. If you take anything from today, my hope is that you will believe that illness is just a small part of your being. And there are many tools that we can use today, right now, that can increase the quality of our lives. So there are some potential causes for autoimmune disease. And if you talk to your doctor about that, you probably heard similar things as I did. So in many cases, there's this DNA predisposition. And I have to say that in my case, no, there wasn't. Even though it's a genetic, I could not find another person with lupus in my family. There is epigenetics, where our bodies change based on external factors and influences. We know that we live a very fast-paced life, that we are always multitasking, worrying about family, work. There is this great book from Zygmunt Bauman that talks about liquid society, showing that we basically flow through life like tourists and changing things at no time. So all these factors, smoking, for example, overstress, living this, fight and flight response all the time, can be a trigger to an autoimmune disease. So if we look at the spiritual root of autoimmune disease, I got an answer from Divaldo Franco a while back, about 1 year ago. And to my surprise, as I was going through my research about illnesses and autoimmune disease, there is very little content specific about that from a Spiritist perspective. Very few lectures, for example. But about 1 year ago, Divaldo was in one of his lectures from the Mansão do Caminho, and during the Q&A, he was asked about autoimmune disease. And while he responded in Portuguese, and this is recorded and available on YouTube, I decided to basically translate and transcript to you guys. So autoimmune diseases are expiatory because technically there is still no solution to the problem in the medical science yet. But in Spiritist science, there is the mental work of modifying the structure of the cells through meditation, through prayer. Then we can perhaps, with our thought, with our spiritual conduct, gain merits that our perispirit will work to change this diagnosis of autoimmune. And what he synthesized over there was right on in terms of the findings, of my findings when going through some of our Spiritist biography. When he said expiatory, I questioned myself. So what is expiation, right? So I went to the Oxford Dictionary, and that's basically reparation for guilt or wrongdoings. But what does it mean if we are talking about Spiritism? For Spiritism, if we go to the Spiritist book, question 990 and 991, we'll see that when we are in the Spiritist state, we clearly comprehend the difference between good and evil. So even if we've been blindsided and kind of a little lost here and making mistakes, when we return home, and I say home, why? Because our real home is not here, is in the spiritual realm. We realize our wrongdoings, our wrong choices, and what we need to do. Then on question 991, the spirits basically say that as we identify our wrongdoings, we ask for a new reincarnation because we perceive that our imperfections will deprive us from happiness. So we ask for a new existence, we can basically expiate our faults. So this is an important concept because in many times we ask for it. We ask for some type of disease that will basically work as a filter, as a cleanse. So we can rewrite our story. Expiation is about what we did in the past. If we go to Leon Denis' book, and this book, I'm not sure has been translated to English, is Le Problème de l'être et de la destinée. It's the problem of the being, the destiny, and suffering. It positions suffering as consequences of law of cause and effect, very similar to what we just saw from Divaldo Franco and also in the Spirit's book. We know that we are still in a planet where suffering is part of everyone's life, where evil is permanent, and we are going through this, transition to a better condition. And that kind of goes back to the point that when we think that we are alone with the suffering, we are not. And this is very important because an autoimmune disease can be very lonely. And many times it's an invisible diagnosis. So people look at us and they don't see it. They cannot tell. They may think that we're faking the symptoms, for example. And when we reflect about the situation that many of us, 1 in 10, kind of go through a similar problem, that gives us another frame, another view. In this book, I believe it's chapter 25, Leon Denis basically says that the pain exists because of law, balance, and education. It's part of education. It's failures of our past that have their weight in our lives. Suffering is often nothing more than the repercussions of violations of the eternal order committed. What he meant by that? He meant that somehow we crossed the line of the law, the divine law, the basic fundamental one, which is what? Love. Loving myself, loving others. Loving myself, for example, committing suicide in a previous life, for example, or indirect suicide in a previous life, like what we saw with André Luiz, and it's very well explained and his first book, Not to Let. So we break the law, and we need to readjust the balance. And then he continues, all beings have to pass through it in turn. So while, and this is a very important point, because we may think, well, but I do have free will. I don't want to go through this. I have news for you. We have free will on our choices, on what we do, not in the consequences. The consequences are part of a law called law of cause and effect. So all beings have to pass through it in turn. Its actions is beneficial for those who know how to understand it. So this is another piece that's very important. As we growing through this experience, this educational experience, it's important that we learn from it. It's not just passing by. It's not helpful if I keep just complaining and living my life like if there's no tomorrow, irresponsibly. So we need to feel, as he says, the effects of understanding. We need to learn the lesson. So if incarnation, and we know that, is a school, we go through some hurdles here, some trials, some expiations to learn things. And each one of us have a new thing, a different thing to learn. If we go to the books from André Luiz, for example, Action and Reaction, chapter 19, he says, and I quote, "The soul reappears in the physical body, carrying the main flaws reflected in the carnal garment as potential areas for outbreak of certain diseases." Potential. This is very important for us to remember. Potential. So even if I have the genetic code to have a disease, for example, diabetes, or a thyroid, or lupus, that doesn't mean that I'm going to have. Unless I misbehave. Unless I am living the life as a tourist, kind of a flying by. If I am overstressed all the time, if I am forgetting my way to repentance, then the law of cause and effect comes basically to remind us very clearly, okay, you're here to learn this, let's go back. So continuing. As potential areas for the outbreaks of certain diseases, offering a chance to the development of various viruses, bacillus, bacteria, capable of leading it to the most serious suffering, according to the debts of that the soul has contracted. So we come with some history. We have a history. We know that we have been through multiple incarnations. All our actions somehow leave impressions in our perispirit, our astral body. And this astral body basically models our physical body. So our actions today work somehow like a wake-up calls to those things in the past. Our actions, our good actions, also work in a different way, protecting us, as we're gonna see in the previous slide, in the next slides, protecting us from these potential diseases and changing the genetic code of our body. So continuing on the book Evolution in Two Worlds, chapter 19. So the remembrance of serious fault without venting and correcting, so kind of experiencing it, working by means to relieve wounds of, regret, guilt, creates in the mind an anomalous state that we can classify as zone of remorse. So we carry guilt. This guilt is in our conscious. So it's not God punishing us. It's us looking at the mirror. It's our conscious as divine beings. Continuous wave of thought begin to coil in a closed circuit with a permanent impression in the perispirit, linked to the memory of the people and circumstances associated with our error. Wow. So if we want to learn what were the morbid predispositions, André Luiz is basically giving us that answer. Our reckless behaviors in previous lives or in these lives can lead to multiple diseases. The etiology of these diseases afflict the change the physical body and tear apart and keep their deep causes in the spiritual body. So that's an important learning as well, because if our spiritual body is the cookie cutter, is the mold to the physical body, every action that we have today, right now, on this life, is basically affecting our physical body and molding our perispirit. So our choices today are defining our future. Our choices today, good or bad, are defining our future. We are building today our happiness or our suffering. Continuing on chapter 19, the question, which methods are used by the superior spirits to treat perispirit lesions? This is wonderful. And this is where we see that Spiritism, all the spiritual therapy really makes a difference. Look what he says. Medical doctors in the spiritual realm study the patient's story, so they go back to our previous story from many, many incarnations to understand the illness's mechanisms. They are looking at the roots. This evaluation is combined with the person's karmic file to determine the possibility of reversing the illness before the new incarnation. Wow. So what we are learning here with André Luiz is that when we look for spiritual therapy of any sort, the diseases can be reversed. That doesn't mean that they will, because it depends on the story or the history of each one of us. The causes of the disease due to past hurdles must be removed from the patient's mind. This is very important as well, because then there is our part, our role, re-educating our minds, re-educating how we live, because we know that our minds create our habits create our lives. Our life outside is a reflection of what we have inside our minds. If we continue with the book Evolution in Two Worlds on chapter 20, that talks about illnesses and our behavior, we see, and this is very important as well, that when we go through strong waves of stress and emotional stress at work, at home, there's some type of separation from the physical body and the astral body. And when it connects again, it doesn't really fit perfectly, creating some faults. In these fault areas, these areas that the connection is not perfect, are more susceptible of forming diseases. So managing our emotions, managing our thoughts is extremely important. Many of us live thinking, this is the way that I am. I get angry. I yell. I'm very passionate. Forgetting that we are damaging not only our bodies, physical bodies, but also our astral bodies. So now, as we move forward, let's talk a little bit about Spiritism and health and the mechanism behind it. In the Spiritist bibliography, we can find a lot of information explaining kind of like a puzzle that explains the mechanism of the mind and the body connection. When we go back to the book Evolution in Two Worlds, and for those who are not familiar of these books that I'm talking about, they were psychographed by Chico Xavier, dictated by André Luiz, and they are part of a collection called Life in the Spiritual Realm. And I cannot talk enough of the importance of this collection. Studying it, not only reading, studying it deeply. Each paragraph of these books have a lot of content. He was very careful choosing the words. So in many cases, we can create a whole lecture just about one single paragraph. So here, on chapter 5 of the book, Evolution in Two Worlds, André Luiz talks about our cells. He says that our cells are intelligent characters that will renew, change, and transform. He talks about all of them according to the vibratory modulation of the spiritual or physical bodies. So again, he's reminding us in 1958 that our thoughts are basically controlling the health of our cells and can tell our cells to change and adapt. Some of you may have read books from Louise Hay, from Joy Dispenza. They're pretty famous. Louise Hay has already passed. She has a book that's called How to Change Your Life. She had a pretty serious cancer and in a condition that she was giving a life sentence, a death sentence, basically, and she reversed it. She reversed because she basically said, I'm not gonna die. I don't want this to happen. She asked her doctor to give her a picture of her tumor, her cancer tumor. And he was like, are you crazy? Why do you want that? And then she starts talking to herself. And she got healthy. And then suddenly the doctor said, well, you know what? The metastases, we can treat now. Before there was no treatment, now we can treat. And then she was like, no, if I went all this way, I'm going through the end. And she made herself healthy again. With Joe Dispenza, he he's a chiropractor, if I'm not mistaken, and he was someone that exercised a lot, and he had an accident. He was hit by a car, and he basically stayed in a bed, and he got this diagnosis that he would not be able to move anymore. So he's in this bed, and he, as a chiropractor, understanding well his body, he starts talking to his cells on the spine and everything else that was broken. And he rebuilds his spine. Nobody understands how, but it was just with his mind. So the reason why I'm sharing this with you all today is that our minds are much more powerful than we can understand. Every time that I say bad things about myself, I'm creating something. Every time that I say I hate this illness, I hate my body, I don't accept this, I'm drinking poison. I'm not helping myself. So how can we change that? In another book from André Luiz, Evolution in Two Worlds, chapter 20, he says, when the patient adopts a behavior favorable to himself by the sympathy he instills to his neighbor, the physical forces find solid support in the radiations of solidarity and recognition that he can absorb from those who receive direct and indirect help, managing to circumscribe the dysfunction to the benign neoplasm that still respond to the organizing influence of the adjacent tissues. So here, André Luiz is telling us, similar to what happened to Louise Hay, that we can change even our cancer cells. In this case, he is telling us that charity, doing good to others, loving your neighbor can heal us. That's new. Not really. Jesus told us 2,000 years ago the same thing. Love your neighbor. Good deeds can repay all the wrongdoings. But many times we get stuck inside our own shell. We accept the diagnosis, no questions asked, and we take it as a life sentence. Forgetting that many times the diagnosis is an invitation for change. It's an invitation that life is giving us to choose a better behavior. Continuing on the book, Evolution in Two Worlds, chapter 5, we see that we can modify the cells based on our will. André Luiz here continues to dive down, explaining that each one of us control our health. With our conscious, with our thoughts, we can tell ourselves how to behave according to our emotions. Emotions and thoughts are very, very connected. And remember that this book was written 70 years ago, and only recent, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we have seen this body, mind, soul connection being discussed. He also says that our cells are like soldiers that will respond according to the requests. So the mind is the general. Our emotions, and it's very hard to separate our thoughts with emotions. They come together. They are commanding exactly what's happening in our body. On chapter 8 of the book, Evolution into Words, he says that with living conscious thought, the human being throws himself creative in renewing forces, thus forging in matter, forging space and time, the intricacies of his own destiny. We are responsible for our own destiny. We are building our state of health and sickness with our behavior. If we want to feel better tomorrow, we need to work very hard starting today. And then let's see what science says. In 2007, a scientific research showed the connection between the brain and the immune system. That was a breakthrough. And then it says that it used to be dogma that the brain was shut away from the actions of the immune system. So what I'm trying to say, with autoimmune, where our cells attack the good cells in our bodies, is our brain giving that command. That's here that we need to change. Then they continue. The brain was shut away from the actions from the immune system, but that was not how it is at all. It turns out that the brain talks directly to the immune system, sending commands that control the body's inflammatory response to infection and autoimmune diseases. I will repeat. It turns out that the brain talks directly to the immune system. The brain is telling our immune system what to do. So what's the path to remission? It's all connected to our emotions. We have the ability to experience negative and positive emotions and feelings that are designed to influence our behavior in different circumstances, and they are directly connected to our physiological and our immune system. The central nervous system has been studied more and more for depression, for schizophrenia, and now we see that development going more and more into the autoimmune response. This slide, I thought that was very impactful, showing that we can choose through, even though different people may be living the same type of experience, they will live that experience in a completely different way. Two people may go to a divorce, they will react completely different. Two people may have a cancer diagnosis, they will react completely different. It's our free will at that point, nothing else. Dr. Kevin Tracy, he had a very interesting discovery a few years ago, where he identified the vagus nerve's role regulation inflammation, and showing that it can tap into our natural healing defenses. He made that discovery while trying to save a patient. And he explains that the vagus nerve speaks directly to the immune systems through a neurochemical called acetylcholine. And stimulating the vagus nerve sends commands to the immune system to stop pumping out toxic inflammatory markers. So what I'm trying to say here is that our emotions are directly connected to our thoughts and to our nervous systems. So emotions such as optimism, joy, or any uplifting thoughts can change our cells in a positive way. If you have practiced meditation and yoga, you see that there are a lot of research as well showing that the vagus nerve helps us basically come into this calm state. With yoga and meditation, and through the exercise of breathing, we move from the fight and flight state, telling ourselves that everything is okay. I know that many of us may look at meditation and yoga and think, oh, that's too boring, that's not for me. I can tell you that through respiration, we can change our mind. And change our mind, we can change our bodies. Going on with science, there was this research that basically links emotions with happiness, saying that emotions are intimately involved in the initiation or progression of cancer, HIV, cardiovascular diseases, and autoimmune diseases. This was 2006. Many of us may be aware that, when you get too stressed, you may have like a tummy ache or headache, that anxiety may cause some type of digestive discomfort, migraines. So we feel many times the impact of our thoughts into our emotions, into our bodies. But in this case, we are seeing that the initiation and progression of these diseases are directly involved by the emotions. There's this book called Molecules of Emotions that was written by the neuroscientist Candace Spurt, and explains in a more technical way the biomolecular basis of our emotions. And her research shows how the chemicals inside us form some type of dynamic information network linking the mind and the body. So she provides in this book like a scientific understanding of the power of our minds, our feelings, and how they can affect. That means, again, that the cells in our body have these receptors, and then the immune system is directly connected to the emotions, meaning two people can work through the same type of disease in two different ways, two responses, two scenarios, same diagnosis. This was another revolutionary find by science. But as we see, it is explained by our Spiritist literature about 70 years ago through the hands of Chico Xavier. Dr. Holders, he's a professor in British Columbia. His areas of research are positive psychology and the science of happiness. And he says that happiness is associated with many benefits, such as better relationships, longer life. Also, physical changes in the immune system. But he's very clear. Not fake smiles. Has to be deeper inside. Doing things that we like. Laughing out loud. Hanging out with people we love. with COVID and social media, it seems that many times we get ingrained into our screen. We cannot live without our cell phones. We don't want to go to the office anymore. We don't want to go to the Spirit Center because there's Zoom. And he talks about the importance of this social human interaction that will basically create an environment of happiness. This is health. Dr. Albert Schweitzer, he's a German doctor who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952. He went to Africa to help people in need. He says something that we've been listening to this lecture from the beginning, that healing comes from the inside out. That the best thing we can do is to give the inner doctor a chance. He says something super strong, that when the patient is stronger than the disease, the doctor doesn't need to do a lot. But when the disease is stronger than the patient, it is used for the doctor to do anything. But when the forces of the patient and the disease are equal, then the doctor's actions are decisive in tipping the balance to the side of the patient or the illness. So we are our best doctors. Our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. 50 years ago, meditation was considered like fringe idea that would not have any role in medical treatment. Nevertheless, science research has demonstrated more and more that meditation and similar spiritual practices, such as the ones that Patanjali started with the sutras, with the Yoga Sutras, reduced oxygen consumption, lowered blood pressure, heart rate, and initiated a cascade of physiological effects that were the opposite of what occurs during the stress response. So when we are praying, when we are meditating, we are creating a response in our body that basically says, I am safe. Everything is okay. So let's see now how spirituality kind of helps us connect with all of this. Whenever the name we want to choose, God, Allah, Creator, Brahman, the inner search of the value of my life, purpose, this search of meanings, the purpose of transcendency is super important as we create the relationships with our family, community, nature. As our values start to shift, we look for more peace and comfort, not in the material things, but in other things. And I want to highlight that there is a huge difference between religion and religionists. And I'm talking about spirituality. So it's the feeling that is inside with no titles, no dogmas. Looking at us as eternal beings where the mind, body, spirit are all connected, that the emotional and physical pain are connected, that there are symptoms that goes in both sides, such as what we hear from Joanna de Angelis when she talks about the integral being. When we look at the top of an iceberg, we may see cancers, obesity, smoking, depression, suicide, autoimmune diseases. But we need to identify the triggers that are creating all of this in the society. The bottom of the iceberg. The top is just the effect. So it may be guilt, regrets, violence, financial problems. We don't know. But when we hear phrases such as soul-crushing, heart-wrenching, they always come with some type of emotional pain. We experience a painful breakup, like he broke my heart. We feel that our heart is crushed. If we are hurt, if we had a car accident, for example, and then we lost our jobs at the same time, in the same week, we say, well, I feel like my soul crushing. So it's not only a metaphor. It's that emotional pain and the physical pain go together. So people feel, for example, suffering from depression, this is science. They may also experience joint pain because as the neurotransmitters change, they may cascade the symptoms that include inflammation, which can manifest as a joint pain. Or anxiety can be linked, for example, with headaches and digestive issues. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say here is that our mind, body, and spirit are connected, and the emotions can be physically felt. On the book Action and Reaction, André Luiz tells us that each one of us carries the faculties of creating in the organic body all kinds of antibodies by immunizing ourselves against the demands of the flesh, faculties which we can considerably expand by prayer, by rectifying disciplines to which it's attached, by mental endurance or by the service of others, with which it attracts precious resources in its favors. Basically saying here that we can strengthen our immune system, regulate our immune system for those with autoimmune by prayer, by mental endurance, by helping others. And then he continues, we must not forget that good deeds are the true antidotes to evil. We heard that from Jesus 2,000 years ago. So if we want to boost the immune system, there are a combination of physical aspects, emotional aspects. I think we recognize a lot of the physical ones on the top. But what we are coming here is that there are things that are not that obvious, such as positive thoughts and emotions and going to our spirit centers and receiving spiritual passes and some type of fluid therapy, such as magnetized water. And we see that on André Luiz's books, on I think it's chapter 49 or 50 of the book No Solar. One example, loving one another, helping others, finding time to do charity. We can regulate our immune system. Leon Denis, continuing about his talk about the pain, he says that there's an intimate sensory sensation and feeling are confounded and are one and the same. He compares that the physical pain produces sensation, moral pain produces feelings. So pleasure and pain are much less in external things than inside ourselves. Why we're saying this? Because it's how we deal with the challenges, how we deal when we face our life, our positive way, optimism to facing the day-to-day hurdles of life or not. So he continues, by our will, we can tame, overcome pain, or at least make it redound to our advantage as a means for elevation. This is so important. to remember that we are here experiencing some things to grow. In the book Mechanics of Mediumship, chapter 22, André Luiz tells us that our mind controls the behavior of our cells again. The cells, in fact, receive constant impact from our mental waves. And based on the principles of action and reaction, we create health or disease, harmony or disharmony in our bodies. And he continues, assuring us that our minds do have the power to influence and direct our immune system. The integrity of the mechanical power of the mind will result in the formation of antibodies. It's amazing that if we learn to control our mind, which was said by the Yoga Sutras 5,000 years ago by Patanjali, we'll be healthy. If we learn to navigate the system here, choosing our actions more carefully, we'll be healthier. So what's the antidote for remission? This is in the book, Evolution in Two Worlds. When helping others, we are helping ourselves, which is why the principles of Jesus vanishing from us, animality, pride, vanity, greed, cruelty, and avarice are exhorting us to simplicity and humility, to boundless fraternity and unconditional forgiveness, established when observe the perfect homology in our inner life. So while the autoimmune diseases, majority of them do not have a cure yet, they can be controlled with medication. As we read this chapter, we learn that when we base our lives on the principles exemplified by Jesus, lived by him, meaning humility, simplicity, universal fraternity, forgiveness to ourselves and to others, because one can only forgive others if one is able to forgive their own trespasses. We will strengthen our minds and create a shield of protection against diseases and immune attacks. So to wrap up here today, our thought is the force of life. And when it's properly oriented, it will work tremendously into our benefits. So as we develop our consciousness and become more self-aware, we can protect, regulate, tune in our body's immune system with choosing, I would say, wisely choosing positive thoughts and emotions. So with that, I thank you all for being with us today, and I wish you a life of health and peace.
Thank you so much, Anna. What a wonderful talk. So many inspiring thoughts, and it feels very empowering, the reflections that you shared. And I hope you will be staying for our Q&A,
Yes.
because questions will be coming through. Wonderful. But before we go to the Q&A, we would like to make some announcements. Please register today for the 13th Spiritist Federation of the Florida Conference. Join us for an inspiring event where we explore the relevance of Jesus in our modern world. This in-person gathering will be held in Apopka, Florida on April 6th and 7th, 2024. English interpretation will be provided. Secondly, Every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're providing a podcast-like series entitled Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life based on the works of Joanna de Angelis. So a new episode will be aired again on Friday, and it is available on YouTube and Spotify. The Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works of Joanna de Angelis and will offer a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, bringing insights, actionable tips, and real world advice to help you lead a better life. Thirdly, the United States Spiritist Federation has launched a new Spiritist app entitled Be My Hope. Be My Hope. Available now for download either on the App Store or Google Play. This brand new app offers uplifting content in a collection of videos, daily messages, and audio materials. Please download it now. And lastly, on the screen, please note there is a QR code. And if you want to help the United States Spiritist Federation produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, please scan it now. Thank you so much. So back to you, Anna. Thanks again for this wonderful talk. And we have some questions for you. And let us start with Kirsten De Santos. Anna, can you speak to how we can change the narrative that God is punishing me to personal accountability and self-forgiveness as it pertains to illnesses?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's all based on the law of cause and effect. So if we plant a seed of an apple, we may expect apples. If we plant a seed of lemons, we may expect lemons. So God is all love. And if we go back to the book, the Spirit's book, we will see that he's this infinite love and perfection. He's this dear Father, and Jesus called him Father. So the idea is that we look at ourselves as their children created. And we think about the choices that we are doing. And when we go through this process, it's very easy to feel guilt and get stuck. So if I'm going through all this pain, that means that I did things that are horrible. Guess what? Today I am the best version of myself. I don't know what I did in my last incarnation, my previous 3 incarnations. But the good news is God loves us so much that we will not let us live an experience that we are not ready for. So if it's like going through a difficult situation gives us a credential that we are ready to go through it. Spiritism gives us a lot of tools to get to know ourselves, of going through inner reform, learn to love one another. Jesus told us about charity, loving ourselves, loving God, loving our neighbor. But we cannot love God and love our neighbor if we do not learn to love ourselves through forgiveness.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, I think it's time for us to take responsibility, right? And not blame anything that happens in our lives on anyone, including God. And absolutely right, yes. So here's another question for you by Yasko Aravakava. Hi, Anna. Great information. As autoimmune disease illustrates clearly that there is no one to blame but us for its control I'm wondering that Jesus is called to be poor in spirit, meek, peacemakers, and deal better with our pride, rebelliousness, etc. may be helpful.
Yes, yes. I'm not sure if I understand if there's a question here, but I agree. So when Jesus is basically telling us, and he showed, not telling, he showed us. I mean, the way that he was born, the family that he was born, he was showing us that through his behavior since the moment that he arrived on this planet. That I want to remind everyone, that is the only perfect spirit that incarnated on this planet that we are aware of. The only one. And I don't know if you guys know that, but when you are a perfect spirit, you don't make mistakes anymore. In this case, we are talking about the governor of our planet. And he came as a simple being in a family of workers that had moral values, strong moral values, strong family values, showing that was the only thing that important. It wasn't power, it wasn't money. He came into Galilee, which was like an area in Israel, and that not Israel, in that area on the Middle East, that it was disregarded by everyone. People would say nothing good can come from that area. That's where he chose to be born. So it's showing us that the values that we need to carry on through lives and through life as eternal beings are not from the physical realm. It's not material things.
Right. I mean, we learn in the Spirit's book, in Spiritism, that at the root cause of all evil or ignorance is selfishness and pride. And what is the antidote? And Alan Kardec gave it to us. He said, and not only Alan Kardec, of course, he says, there's no salvation without charity. So here we have, right, in almost one sentence, the recipe for success. And you spoke to that. Yes. Thank you so much, Anna. Kirsten, this guilt is the causal factor of spirit obsessions because they are only present where there are debts to be redeemed. That's by Manuel Miranda. So Anna, how do we manage or get rid of our guilt, both conscious and unconscious?
Well, Kirsten, if you know, I want that too. I want that recipe. So Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, he's very known by his books on obsession, and guilt is like that lock that basically calls to the malevolent spirits, the ones in many cases that we hurt in the past, to find us. And that guilt is basically engraved in our conscious, because as children of God, we were created with the divine laws inscribed in our minds. So every time that I trespass that law, I know in the deepest of my soul that I'm doing something wrong. But how do we manage, to get out of this guilt? First, recognizing it. And André Luiz explains in the spirit, in one of his spirit's books, and I read one of them, that when we are in the spiritual realm, we get to know the wrongdoings, and then we say, okay, I want to go back and do it right. And assuming that responsibility, maybe doing good to others, for example, not talking about autoimmune, but talking about another serious pain. For example, I did an abortion when I was 15 years old, for example. When I was 15 years old, that seemed like the right thing to do because of the circumstances that I was living. But now, today, I look back and I think, wow, that's not the right thing to do. I wish I could change that. Guess what? I can't. So Think about the person who's going through that type of experience right now. What can that person do? That person can help other babies without a mother. That person can help mothers who are feeling desperate and alone. That person can do charity to families that are going through difficulties. So in my view, we work through guilt by doing good deeds. Usually, if we having guilt in the past, let's think, how can we reframe that? When we get frozen and locked into our past actions, that doesn't take us anywhere, and that's not positive at all. So when we see that on books from André Luiz, basically straightening us, saying, don't get stuck into guilt, because that would be the connection to worse things. So work to the benefit of others, love others, do good to others. And as Jesus says, and I think that's a big hope, that doing good to other people will basically erase our wrongdoings. When we are looking at other people's pain, we forget ours.
Yeah, using guilt as like a wake-up call, right? As you said, noticing it, saying, wait, there's something that's not right. And then we can start repenting and doing the good and using that as an antidote. Yes, thank you. Very practical and helpful. So now we have another question from the CEI International Spiritist Council. It sounds like healing is primarily a path from the inside out, while most of society treats it reversely. Would you agree?
That's exactly it. So it's not about the illness, it's about the ill. So we've been seeing examples from the books from André Luiz, but I wanted to show today in my lecture examples from the science, showing that our mind, our choices, we can use our free will to reverse our illnesses. Now, one thing that is important, I don't know if you guys remember that. As we do that, we ask help from the spiritual beings. In some cases, people will be cured. Some cases not. Why? Because the spirits will look at our history. They will look at what we need to go through. And sometimes we need to go through that. So they will alleviate. They will give us faith and hope, and they will treat us. And many times we feel that when we experience like some type of energy therapy, such as the passes. They will help us go through it, support us. And many times I would say carry us, but we need to go through it. In some cases we don't. And like we saw with Jesus, that he was able to cure many people. Why? Because they were ready. At that point, they were ready. But if they failed, they went back to the old habits, guess what? What would happen? That's the law of cause and effect. Then we are seeding for our future, planting to our future seeds of suffering again. Not here. You're in mute.
Yeah, it's time for us, I think, to see illness as a blessing and to be grateful for this opportunity to change our ways radically.
Yeah, I think it's a message, as Leticia said, of empowerment, right? So it's a wake-up call instead of blaming others or blaming the situation, the society. It's about taking responsibility, as you said, and work on it. It's time.
Yeah.
So
and
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and how beautiful that we can, right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we need to celebrate that. So thank you for giving us really a recipe for success. So thank
Yeah,
you so
and
much,
Leticia is asking, doing the good is the antidote. Yes,
Yeah.
helping others. Yes, that the doing good, charity, it changes the chemicals in our cells, Leticia, but also through how people feel about the good things that we do, those vibrations help change. There is this interaction between the invisible and the visible that changes the chemicals of our cells too.
Yes. Love in action. Yeah. So thanks again, Anna. So we have these talks every week, and as you can see on the screen, next week we will be welcoming, let's see who is talking, Vicente Pessoa, and he will be talking on Plurality of Inhabited Worlds by Camille Flammarion's philosophical view. So please join us next week, and thank you everyone for being here today, all the listeners near and far. And Anna, once again, thank you for the blessings you've brought to this program. Thank you, and have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you.